Hey, Eric. Hey, Glenn, if I can go off topic or at least back to an older topic, what kind of, if any, retreat in grape bricks might we see when weather mellows out?
Oh, Glenn.
I'm sorry, what? Say your question again, Zach.
When our weather pattern mellows out, I want to know if the high bricks that we're seeing in lots of our sampling in different fields has a chance that it might actually retreat maybe 0.5% or maybe even a full percentage point.
Well, it may if people irrigate some, you may see some of the bricks go down, but generally what we're getting is accumulation of sugars by dehydration, I think. So I don't think that's going to back off too much. You know, Al, you had many years experience. What have you seen?
Well, if you can rehydrate the berry, you'll see the bricks come down.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is we've had like that type of weather, and then you get a rain, and you can check your bricks the day after the rain, and it's fine. And 2 days after the rain, it hasn't changed, and by the third day, it suddenly drops a couple degrees. So I think that it just takes a little while for the water to get back to the berries, but they do seem to rehydrate.
Al, there's a rule. You're not allowed to use the word rain until October.
All right.
We'd love some rain.
I love it. I'm getting gardening tips and doing legal work at the same time. This is what's great about Mendocino County.
That's right.
My tomatoes are loving the heat.
Mm.
Tomatoes like it as long as they have a little bit of moisture in their root system. Everything's been ripening really nicely, but they also, if you're a little late on watering, you might end up with dehydration pretty quick.
Yeah.
We've been watering a lot to keep everything plumped up. We haven't seen any dehydration. I mean, especially with these hot days, we've been watering just a little bit every single day, and the bricks is still getting pushed up pretty quickly.
So you're not raising raisins at this point?
Oh, we're definitely not. No.
That's good.
Let's see. Are we close to having a quorum?
I believe we have a quorum now. The only person I was expecting that I do not see is Director Crane at the moment.
Okay, we'll wait another minute.
Hey, Amir, if you can hear me out, a quick question I wanted to ask you. What is the spatial resolution of our groundwater model?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's 100 meters by 100 meters, if you mean the cell grids that we have.
Thanks a bunch.
Sure.
Eric, this is Beth. What is a quorum for this board since it's 6 members? Is that right?
6 members, so it would have to be 3 or more.
I think, so I read the JPA and it says a simple majority. So unfortunately, would that just be 3? I think my interpretation would be, it'd have to be 4.
Let's ask Holly. Holly, can we ask her that, Eric? Go through the right
I believe
channels.
we can ask her that, yes.
I believe it's 4 for a vote.
4 for a vote. Okay, let me give Doug a call to make sure he is on his way.
Well, it is 1:34, so maybe we should just go ahead and call the meeting to order at 1:34 and
recording in progress.
Begin with a roll call vote.
Director White.
Present.
Director Tavares, Director LaRue, Alternate Todd, Director Robinson,
I'm here.
Director Crane, and Chair McGorty.
Present. Okay, so next on the agenda are consent items. Are there any additions or comments, deletions before we call for approval?
Is Douglas Crane here? I don't believe.
He's not present. I'm trying to get a hold of him right now.
I don't think. This is just my understanding. I don't know if we can do any agenda items without.
Right. The consent vote is a vote, so you need a quorum for a vote. But you can continue with the agenda though.
Okay.
You just can't vote on
Al, is there a comment?
Yeah, I have a comment. So in the future, if we could, when we have the minutes, have them the lines numbered down the side so that when you find typos or things that you might want to address in there to correct, you can do it without having to just refer to it. I know that Chair McGutry would probably rather be Chair McGorty, and the FSS acronym would probably be more intelligible if it was not FSF. Those are two things typos that were in the minutes. So if we had line items, I could just tell you what lines those are in.
Understood.
Doug will be joining us presently.
And it's not bad for the pages and pages of minutes to find only two typos. I thought that was pretty impressive minutes.
Okay. Shall we move on to the next part of the agenda, which is public comment on items not on the agenda? Does anybody have anything which they would like to comment on?
Yes, I do, Glenn. Hi. I'm not sure if this is on the agenda, so correct me if I'm wrong, but just regarding with Doug being a little bit behind schedule today, if all of the appointees or the board members make sure they have an appointed alternate and that they stay in communication with them so that they can attend if necessary. I don't know, for example, if Director Todd knows he's the alternate for the IRWA seat. So thank you.
A good point. So that's important so we can keep our meetings on track. So welcome, Director Crane. We're glad that you're able to join us. And we're going to go back to the consent items and consent agenda. Do you have any additions or corrections, Director Crane, that you would like to add? If not, we'll have a roll call vote to approve the consent agenda. Anyone make a motion?
Move to approve.
Second?
This is Zach. I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
and Chair McGorty.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, moving along on the agenda. We now have discussion and possible action items, beginning with the general manager report, the state of the GSA and future progress. So Eric, if we'd like to build this item.
Thank you, Chair McGorty. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to pull this up because I think a slide would be helpful for people to read as we go through it. As many of you are aware, Wes just stepped into the role of taking over the GSA administration services for the GSA, and we're truly honored to be in this role to help assist the GSA achieve its goals, implementing the GSP. And over the past relatively 6 months, we have taken a lot of effort and steps to gather the TAC and board's opinions and thoughts about how we should identify GSA priorities. And receiving from that feedback, a couple of things came apparent to us. And it sounds like the GSA's priorities are aligned with filling in data gaps, pursuing a rate and fee study to help make the GSA become self-sufficient, pursue grants to augment GSA income and cash flow when appropriate and when it makes sense, and moving forward with implementing PMAs over the next few years that are aligned with the priorities that were identified over the past couple months at the May workshop and the June board meeting. But there's also some other milestones that we achieved that is, I think it's a cause for celebration for the GSA, which is we updated our communication and engagement plan. We acquired our own legal counsel, and they already have gone to work and have done excellent work for us. So we really appreciate that, Holly and the Chronic team. And we're very thankful to have you. And also we discussed prioritizing rate and fee study and how we should implement it over the next couple of years. So that way we can achieve being self-funded and sustained. And we also were nimble in being adaptable to the executive order that was thrown upon us in March of 2022. And we're very close to getting our process together and our compliance form together, so that way we can be responsive as quickly as possible to that. And we will be discussing that today at this meeting. And we've also had a lot of discussions around PMAs and grant funding options. And so I think that's a lot to cover and a lot to accomplish in a short amount of time. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone for all your help and all your feedback and for your partnership to get where we are today. So that's the main items on the report that I wanted to summarize. If you would like to get a more detailed synopsis of that is included in the board packet, and there's quite a few topics that are covered in there, just to share a summary of everything that has been gathered to date. Thank you, Chairman.
Eric, any board member questions or comments?
Yes, Crane, I have a comment. With our valley floor and our basin water level being so much above sea level and so many other characteristics of it not being typical, I think we must all remain mindful and seek every opportunity we have to not be limited by the arbitrary date for the drawdown, but what we really have underneath us as a pool, as a resource. So anything that we can do towards moving from that arbitrary level to realistic in terms of maintaining a healthy aquifer, I think we need to remain mindful of. Thank you.
Excellent point. Any comments from Eric on that?
No, I think that's a great point to bring up. And part of filling the data gaps is to further define what that means and what those levels are that the GSA is comfortable managing, sustaining the basin within.
Any other board member questions or comments? Okay, any questions or comments from the general public on this item? I can't see everybody, so.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so Beth.
Sorry, I was a bit slow off the mark there. So Elizabeth Salamone serve as the general manager for the Flood Control District, and I serve as the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee to this GSA. Thank you, Eric, for the update. 6 months-ish is a good time to give us a little update. And I just want to let everyone know that working with Eric has been really, I think, very successful. And we communicate regularly, being the chair of the TAC. He's nimble, quick to react, just really great so far. And I'm really pleased that we have him. Thank you, Eric, for everything.
Yeah,
thank you for the kind words, Beth.
Yeah, I will second that. Eric is very responsive and very quick, and now we have Holly too as part of our team. So looking forward to working with her. And the fact that she's a local girl just makes it all the more fun. So we're moving forward towards being a good team and good organization. Plus, we have the two vets here, Laura and Amir. So we're putting together a good team, I think, to address what can be a thorny issue at times. All right, so let's go on to the next item B, which is grant funding opportunities and PMAs. Eric?
Yes, thank you so much, Glenn. Chairman Gordy, appreciate it. And so I want to first start off with giving you all a summary of what we discussed at the TAC level 2 weeks ago, and or last week rather, and then identify the grant opportunity that we think is the best value for the GSA to potentially pursue, pending the board's views on that and approval. And then also we will be outlining a list of PMAs that are most aligned with all the feedback that we've received so far from the TAC and the board over the past 6 months. And then we will also dive into a little bit of how the financial management of pursuing a grant versus not pursuing a grant looks like, and how that can be valuable to us to prepare ourselves for the future. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And I will jump into the slides. So we discussed several slides here. So this is the first one. And the first is that there is a DWR Round 2 Sigma implementation grant that is coming in the next 6 months. It is planned to be open for solicitation starting potentially in October, but that really depends on DWR's timing with the legislature and everything that's going on there. And so there's a possibility that the solicitation for that grant will not open until actually later on into January or February. But despite that, it would be in the best interest of the GSA, if we want to pursue this grant, to start preparing to work towards having a strategy around pursuing this grant, to have the highest probability of success, and to take great care to put in the right projects that we feel are going to be the most effective for us to achieve aligning our projects to what we have as our goals for the GSA. And so we could utilize the GSA administration contract that we currently have with West Yost, being myself and others, to lead that proposal effort and work closely with our on-call consultant, Larry Walker Associates, and possibly also Laurel and her group at CLSI, to develop a proposal that will be submitted for the grant. And that way we have the GSA's administration perspectives plus the fiscal management of all that. And then we also have the technical aspects all being incorporated into that grant application. So that way it's very clear to DWR what we're trying to achieve and how we plan to achieve it, and why the funds are meaningful to us and how we're going to go about using those funds in the way that's going to help us achieve implementing our GSP as we have outlined in the GSP before. And so there are a couple of dates to be mindful with this grant, which is first that all the money has to be spent relatively between June 2026 and June 2027. So we have a 2 to 3-ish year window to which we can spend money to pursue those projects. And I believe, Laura, I see your hand. I'll finish with this one thought and then I'll drop it back to you. And so even though 2 to 3 years might seem like a long time, one of the things that we have to be careful and mindful of is that any major well projects or construction projects could potentially be delayed because of the demand for wells right now during a drought and other factors. And so construction projects of any kind must be carefully thought through to actually include those or not. And so that's not completely off the table, but it's advised to have caution before we actually consider including those in. And so I'm going to pause for a moment and open it up to Laura to make a comment.
No, and mine is a super quick one. I just, it looks like the latest news are that it's really going to be open in October. And honestly, they are saying that they don't know yet if they will close it at the end of November or at the end of December. So Kelly was suggesting to be ready as soon as we can. That's the only thing. So
that's a great point.
So basically she was saying, plan to be ready by the end of November. Then if we move it to the end of December, you have a little bit more time, but ready to submit actually. So the solicitation will not stay open for long. That's the only message. Okay.
So thank you so much. And just to clarify a little further, Kelly List is the DWR contact that Laura and I have also interacted with a couple times. And she's very familiar with the grant that's going to be solicited and going out soon. And so that information is pretty actionable and probably very accurate. So that just also goes to show that there's a little bit of urgency behind this as well. Moving on to the next slide here. So taking into account all the feedback that we received over the past 6 months to take into account the priorities that we interpreted being from the TAC and the board, we find there's several opportunities for us to include existing PMAs and work that's currently happening right now that's coming out of the GSA's budget, but also including new projects and management actions that could be beneficial for us to pursue in this grant. And so the first one is monitoring activities. So right now, the GSA is paying for monitoring activities, which is great. And we also have the opportunity to shift some, if not all of those monitoring activities that are related to other project and management actions to the grants. That could be a cost savings from the GSA's member contributions that are funding the GSA right now. So we could save some budget out of our own pocket in that regard. With the potential going for a rate and fee study, it also would be beneficial for us to conduct a groundwater well inventory study to gather more information on groundwater wells within our basin, because that will help us define and better ascertain data that we can provide to a rate and fee study consultant for them to make a better analysis with. So that also is one that is recommended to be included and is also one of the projects that was voiced to be a priority for the GSA to consider over the next couple of years. We could also include outreach and education that are PMA specific to all the projects that we will be listing off for this grant opportunity. So then that is no cost to the GSA and that could be grant funded. And so any specific meetings or workshops that are PMA specific to those grant items that we will be pursuing potentially, those could be all funded through the grant. And so that could be a huge help to help us expand our outreach education about these PMAs to our stakeholders within the basin. The next couple of potential projects we can includes the groundwater model updates and the reporting. So right now, model updates and reporting being annual reports and also the pending 5-year GSP update report, and also the possibility of having the GSP being reviewed and getting comments back and having to make revisions to a GSP pending DWR review. That could also be included in the grant. And so that could be also another way we can have cost savings on this. And that could be potentially a big lift for the GSA to do on its own. So through the grant, that could be really helpful. Yes, Chair McGordy.
So I did happen to see a letter that was submitted from the National Marine Fisheries Service about our groundwater sustainability plan. So what's our procedure when we receive those? Do we have to comment on them or do we just put them in a file and wait until there's a chance to deal with them as the Department of Water Resources comes back to us, or how is that handled?
I'll answer really quickly and then Laura, feel free to jump in as well. So I think that particular entity also commented on many other GSAs, GSPs. And so there is a lot of views from other entities that are also trying to point out potential deficiencies that they might see from their perspective. And so at some point in future GSP update, maybe at the 5-year update, that's when it would make sense to incorporate those comments and address those comments explicitly. But I'm also going to throw it back to Laura on her thoughts on that as well.
I think I totally agree. We don't have to respond now, but actually those specific comments, Glenn, on the Ukiah GSP, they were they were different than from others that I received for other basins. So they were very targeted. And I think we can use the next 4 years to really work toward making something better. You know, we were so limited in data that we did what we could. And now things are improving. So we can definitely work for the next year, keeping those comments in mind, even if we don't have to formally answer. So but I think those specific comments were kind of useful in terms of for giving us an idea of what they are looking for. I'm not saying that they are all correct or whatever. I'm just saying that they can make us think a little more. So this is the way I would do it. Just keep it in the background, use it for making improvements. And when the times comes, we'll have answers ready.
Well, it seems like as we're going through this process of applying for grants, if there's something in their commentary that is specific that we may have overlooked or not adequately studied, it might be an opportunity to address some of them. And it seems to me as though there were questions about groundwater, surface water interactions were a big concern for them. So.
Absolutely, Glenn. And I think I had some call with them. I think what we kind of promised is that we will be using all the new data that have been installed and that are collected now to bring the model to a better level so that we can use the model to really simulate this stream aquifer interaction with more confidence. And I think they understood that really we were so limited by not having data. So and when I explained that they needed to wait to really judge the model for that specific component, I think they got it. So,
yeah. Zach, you have a comment?
Glenn, I missed who submitted these comments, and Eric, would it be possible to distribute those to the board?
Yeah, the comments were submitted by National Marine Fisheries Service.
Yeah,
and yeah, we should. I think it'd be really worthwhile for the board to actually have maybe a study item. Maybe invite the people who submitted the comments to address us, so that we have it right out front, so we know what some of the issues are that we're going to have to deal with as we improve our plan.
Yeah,
and I've heard other people in the environmental community who have also commented to me that they thought there were deficiencies. They really haven't submitted any written documents, but I think that there's always bound to be skepticism when we're trying to study such an amazingly complex system.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. And then the last three are interconnected surface water, groundwater studies. So that goes to addressing some of those potential comments that we received. And this is important for filling in data gaps in some areas that have been identified and are known in the GSP, to where there is some uncertainty around the interconnected surface water, groundwater, whether it's a gaining or losing stream in certain areas and to what effect. So that is also one that's being considered. And then another one, which is, I think, a big important crux to this grant, is to also consider a water supply and recharge project feasibility study. And the big picture behind this is that as a GSA, the basin needs to be considered as a source of water, as to Director Crane's point, and to what levels of groundwater are we comfortable with managing And I think a big factor to that will be how the Potter Valley project proceeds and the flow that's released now and into the future, and evaluating some of those scenarios. And then also considering how recharge can maybe augment some of those scenarios. And so that's a big key component, I think, for this grant that I believe will be important. From considering all the feedback received, this is a sticky point item that I think is worth consideration. And then the last thing that was uncertain, but we got confirmation recently, is that the written fee study for the consulting and then specific board and stakeholder engagement meetings and potentially legal counsel all can be reimbursed by the grant, which could be a major cost savings to the GSA as well. And so those are the main projects for the grant that we're considering proposing. And then I also didn't want to not have member agencies that have a really good project that they would like to include. However, there is the possibility that having a large ticket item project could be potentially financially risky in some regards to the GSA. And so we thought through a mechanism to allow a agency to put in a large project into the grant that ultimately we would help them manage and coordinate, but they would put up some funds up front to ensure that we have the financial protection based on contingency and also withholding from the grant to allow us to not take on too much risk. So this is one example. Assuming there's a $2.7 million project they want to include, we would basically have a contract and be asking for them to put up front, not a small down payment, but it's one that is intentional to make sure that the GSA is protected. But then also anything that wasn't spent would be reimbursed back to the member agency. So then that way, they get their funds back for anything that wasn't spent. So to put this all into context as to why the grant could be beneficial versus not going after the grant, is we developed a fiscal management model to sort of project out from now to fiscal year 26-27 about how the cash flow for the GSA will be impacted if we do not pursue a grant versus if we pursue a grant. And so putting some of these assumptions aside, the big thing here to pay attention to are two items. The first is that without pursuing a grant, the cash flow is quite impinged going forward if the GSA plans to pursue a written fee study on its own. And the other big factor here is that this is taken into account several different things, which is that legal counsel will be fully utilized in the ways that are being projected to be utilized based on the contract that we recently approved. And then also, this is also taking into account the contract amendment that we will be discussing today is also in full effect and being utilized when it needs to be utilized based on certain projects that we have. And so that is this scenario right here. And as you can see, in some quarters, we are running either empty or running very low on funds, which is a concern. However, if we do plan to pursue a grant, and if we pursue this grant in particular, even accounting for the withholding that occurs. And so with this grant, if we pursue $1.3 million worth of funding and they withhold 10% of that till the very end of the last invoice, after everything's completed and everything's been invoiced, even accounting for that, and if we incorporate all the projects to the full extent that we've listed in our PowerPoint earlier, our cash flow situation and our cash reserves is in a much stronger position. And with that, we can be prepared for future projects that we may need to pursue in the future. But then we also are prepared for pursuing and maybe other grants, and we have the cash reserves available to expand our scope of services that we may need to do based on what data we find and what projects we find are important for us. But on the flip side of that, we could also find from our studies and everything that we're actually doing quite well. And the PMAs that we need to identify are actually a little bit less capital intensive. And so our spending might be lower in the future, depending on what those studies result as. And so I wanted to show you these two scenarios to give you an idea of the clear cash flow and potential account balance for the GSA based on pursuing the grant versus not pursuing the grant. As the board, you guys have a full understanding and appreciation of what you think is the most important and valuable for the GSA to continue forward. And I felt that this would be really helpful to demonstrate the possible two scenarios with the grant, without the grant, in helping you understand what we're asking to pursue this grant and what they may look like going forward. So with that, I am going to stop talking and pass it back to Chair McGordy, and we can discuss further
Before
and
you
ask
stop,
any questions.
Yeah,
Yes.
before you stop talking, this is a good opportunity to engage you if people have questions about the scenarios that are presented here. First of all, Eric, make clear to us again, when we apply for a grant and we receive the grant, how is the money distributed?
That's a great question. So the money is distributed on a quarterly basis. And so to put this into context, if we apply for the grant and we submit in November, and we find out the grant is awarded to us, let's say that DWR does it all and they let us know, congratulations, Ukiah, GSA, you guys are allowed to pursue a grant. And we get notified in June 2023. Then we would be eligible to start spending money and get reimbursed for anything back to January 2023. But in this fiscal model, we are assuming we would start spending money on these projects we identify in the grant in Q1 of fiscal year 23-24, which would be July of 2023. So a month after we know we're awarded the project. And so we would go approximately 6 to 9 months before we would get reimbursed for any of the spending that we would start doing. And the reason for that is there's some lag time between when you're spending that money on the grant and when you get it invoiced and approved and everything. And since it's done on a quarterly basis, there will be a little bit of lag time there. And then you keep billing quarterly until you finish your projects. And then once you get the final invoice in, they will reimburse you. And then once the final invoice is received, the DWR, in most cases, will be quick and respond and reimburse you for the remaining 10% of the total grant cost that was withheld, which is per their policy.
Okay, so in other words, if we're going to spend money, then the way the University of California had it set up was really great because we had essentially our own bank that we could draw from that they'd reimburse to. So we don't really have that though. So this is where your comment about if we wanted to take on some of these other projects that member organizations might be interested in, we've got to have some money to draw from in order to pay for it.
Yes. Yes, since we have our own account and we're managing it ourselves, we need to be careful about what we spend and how we spend it, so that way we do not go into the red.
Right, and there is a possibility, though, as I understand it, that sometimes the contractors we're working with are okay with kind of not being paid until we finally get our check from DWR. Is that correct?
Yes, but that would have to be discussed and agreed to on a contractor-to-contractor basis, and not all contractors may be comfortable with working at risk for a certain period of time. Depends on the spending that they would be doing and what they would be billing and withholding until it's ready to be reimbursed.
Okay. I'm going to call on Laura just for a commentary because she's worked a lot with DWR, and if she can share with us some of her experiences of how clients have worked with Larry Walker and Associates to get paid by DWR. It might be enlightening right now as we contemplate our financial future.
So Glenn, we went through different things. I think all the contracts that we had on this Prop 1 or Prop 68 grants, they were written in a way, so basically we were getting paid only after the agency was paid by DWR. So for most of them, we were only paid every 3 months, every quarter. And we're still waiting for some of the last payments. So just because some of the last payments are not there yet, but it was clearly written in the contract. For somebody else, we got something different, like one of the RCD who got one of these contracts. Basically, they contracted out only 90% of the grant, and they amended the last 10% at the end only when everything looked good. Because you don't have to have this 10% upfront every quarter. You can tell DWR, I want to have the 10% at the end altogether. And then my impression is that you can see right away if things are going well with DWR or not. And I can tell you, I had agencies that didn't manage properly their grant and they are still in troubles. But this is only, I think that's only one. All the others did a great job. So DWR is paying everything. I also got a clarification. This money which comes from proposition, basically they will do whatever they can to pay also the 10%, because that's it's not a general fund. So if it is a general fund, there is a risk for losing this 10%. Being a proposition, there is not. So I think what would be important, what I would do is be very clear on how you write up the contract with the contractors and how you want to do it. And I think knowing how things are going, everybody would feel pretty comfortable. I mean, we have been paid every 3 months, even less, even more actually, for the past 4 years. And that was part of the game to make these things happen. So the contract is really what can be the insurance, let's say, for the GSA. Mm-hmm. My suggestion would be really to think about telling the DWR right away that you want to have the 10% at the very end, so that basically you have 3 years for whatever happens, to think about, to see how things are going. But if deliverables are coming together, if the work is done, I haven't seen any issue with payment so far. Mm-hmm. And there are many GSAs in a situation which worse than yours. They have 0 cash in their bank, but still they have to go after this grant because there is no other option. Either they stop doing Sigma or they take the risk. So in your case, I think a good language in the contract can help.
Okay, and I presume that Holly, that's part of your function and service, is to help us with our contracts with the state agencies.
Yes, absolutely.
And I don't know if you're representing any other, I forgot, are you representing any other groundwater sustainability agencies right now?
Yes, together with Scott Morris, I represent 4 other GSAs.
Okay, so you kind of know the drill when it comes to working with Department of Water Resources.
Not only do I know the drill, but I have templates in Word that I intend to tweak as necessary for you.
Okay. All right, well, that gives me a little bit more level of confidence about this. I will just share with the group that I was kind of tasked by the Board of Supervisors to come up with a water project for each one of our districts. And one of the ones that I want to pursue, having discussed this a little bit with Sean White, is a demonstration and kind of pilot project for groundwater recharge, possibly at Riverside Park. And Sean's already indicated to me that he probably doesn't really have the capacity to do everything, but I'm thinking that possibly we could be partners with the city of Ukiah and Mendocino County in an application for this, because I think groundwater recharges during high flows is something that's going to be very common in the future. for water management in California. So that's something that I'm thinking would be worth doing, and it's sort of in our we plan to study it, but it'd be good to actually have a demonstration project. So, Holly, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just that there's, as you probably all know, there's a ton of water infrastructure money coming both from the federal and state government. And there's a lot of emphasis, particularly in rural areas. So anything we can do early to demonstrate that we can successfully receive money and implement a project and really get stuff done, I think will open the door to future funding. So doing something like that early that's very, like, has a manageable scale could have benefits not only for the water recharge benefit of that, which is great, but for future funding opportunities as well.
Sean, you're on the line. Would you care to make any comments?
I mean, I think the city already has that funding relationship with the state. We've been one of the few DACs that consistently applies and consistently completes projects. And I think now we're on the other side of that hump. I do think Riverside Park has potential. I think we need to learn a little more about it, but I think there's opportunities for detaining water, for infiltration in that site, both from the river and from adjacent tributaries as well.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hoping for is to also put some science behind it too, and enter into an agreement with the University of California Ag Natural Resources, specifically Helen Dalthey and Toby or Jean, who are working on some of these recharge grants, and see if we can draw them in to help us come up with some scientific monitoring to show the effectiveness of this. It's just something that is just circulating in my head. I don't have anything really well defined, but I still think this is a viable project and one that we should consider based on what Holly has to say. And of course, Sean does have a great track record. I think that he's trusted very, very much by the water resource agencies to get stuff done. So I don't think that that's an issue, but I'm also trying to build some creds for our organization as well as collaborators, because I think in Mendocino County, it's tough to field a team. And, as we show that we have good cooperation among our membership agencies, it will only strengthen our credibility. So I'm trying to figure out how to leverage the talent that we have on this board.
Mr. McGurty, in addition to build on your point about leveraging a team, a thing that's really unique about this board is you have tribal representation. I don't see them here today, but we'll talk about them in absentia. There's funding specifically also set aside for tribal governments. And so if you ever have a collaborative project, or to Sean's point, something that really represents disadvantaged communities, it opens doors to additional pots of funding we might not otherwise have access to.
Good point. And we do forget that, but we do have kind of a special GSA that a lot of other regions don't. So any further comment before we move on from this topic? Okay, well, next item on the agenda then, Eric.
Actually, Chair McGorty, we have a recommended action for this agenda item.
Okay, I see that. I'm sorry.
No problem.
The recommended action is the board approves the proposed contract amendment to West Yost Associates and GS.
Oh, Chair McGorty, if I may, this is for
item B. I'm sorry.
Item B, yes. Thank you.
Okay, the recommended action here is that the board direct GSA staff to prepare a letter proposal for West Yost in cooperation with LWA to prepare and submit a GSA grant application for the DWR Sigma implementation grant. Would anyone care to propose this motion?
I have actually two late questions, if I can insert myself.
I'd
like to get a sense what we think the probability of success with this grant application would be, and then a second question after that.
So as you may have heard in the past, with the critical basins that were identified, they were only, and Laura, please correct me on the number, but there was like a small number of them relative to the amount of groundwater basins that are currently present in the state that are under a GSP plan now. And so DWR reviewed a handful of those, and all of those got funding. And the way DWR handled that was they all got a certain amount of an equal amount of money, essentially. And then for this round, we are competing in a much larger pool of GSAs competing for this money. But the positives for our GSA compared to other GSAs is that we are a DAC, and DACs have a priority this round for funding. And there's specific money set aside for DACs to make sure that we get the support that we need. And then also, I think from the efforts that LWA has done to prepare some of the language from previous efforts to pursue grants in the past, we have a really strong team between West Yost and LWA to prepare a compelling grant application and to convey the message in such a way that we should have a fairly decent chance to obtain the funding. And if there's any indication to the amount of money that's available now compared to what the amount of money that was available for the previous round, there should be something for us, for sure, if they choose to award everyone a certain amount. But I would also let Laura speak to that as well, to what her thoughts are.
Honestly, we keep hearing that it's gonna be a competitive application, and probably it will be, Zach, but there is really quite a big pot of money. I think it's close to 250 million right now. And there are 78 basins. Out of these 78 basins that are DAC, they have priorities. Basins that did great with the administration for the previous grant are high in the priority, and you guys did a wonderful job. There was no complaint from DWR. So I don't know. My perspective is that this grant is really the low-hanging fruit, is what they were just saying. Go for it, because there will not be another one with the same chances of success. So I don't want to be too optimistic, but I think it's really much, much, much higher than any other grant.
I get it, and I like your numbers. 250 million divided by 78 is 3 million basin. So that sounds promising.
Somebody is going after 20 million, but that's not going to happen. Basically, DWR will pick and choose. Yeah. Basically, we will have many different projects, and then they will decide, okay, you get funding for A, B, C, but no D or whatever. So we will have to do that.
Second question, we have a very awkward interim period here. We don't have official feedback on our plans, so we don't know which project management actions are going to be the highest priority for our overlords. So I'm wondering if we put together this grant proposal and for some reason it doesn't go the way we had hoped, are we committed to those same PMAs that we put in the proposal, or we can put them back on the shelf and see what happens next?
If they're not funded, Zach, you can go back to the drawing board and start over. So, and I agree that we don't have comments officially, but as Glenn said early, we got unofficial comments, so we kind of know probably what are the components of the GSP that really need more work. So I think we have some feeling, and I think what will be appreciated is the GSA needs to demonstrate that they're functioning and doing something. So you are already moving forward with this, and it is important to demonstrate that the plan is not just staying on a shelf. It's going to be used in some way. And you don't have to answer all the questions immediately. So I think what we have in mind right now, it's kind of in alignment with all the deficiencies that we also saw in our GSP, because we knew we didn't have the information. So it's nothing new. It's all what we were pretty much aware of.
Okay. Devin, you have a question.
Devin?
Just really quickly, to Laura's point earlier, and I guess maybe this will sort of overlap with our next meeting schedule, but if the grant is coming out in October and we're expecting to try to get a draft by November, is this board going to have a chance to meet and review that in that time frame?
Well,
I would hold a special meeting if needed to make sure that happens.
I'm also wondering, should we have an ad hoc to actually work on the development of the grant? Would that make some sense?
I believe so.
All the other GSAs are doing that, Glenn. They set up an ad hoc with only 2-3 people to move forward with the grant. So just to be ready.
Okay. Holly?
Hello, me again. There's actually 2 kinds of committees you could have, an ad hoc committee and a standing committee. Ad hoc is simpler to set up, right? The board chair just appoints 2 folks to the ad hoc. You might consider doing a standing committee though. It's a little more formal. It's for entities that are going to have ongoing jurisdiction over a topic. So things like fundraising and finding money to implement the PMA and the GSP seems sort of tailor-made for a standing committee, because likely that's going to be an ongoing topic that I don't see a world where you're not going to want funding based on Eric's detailed projections. So that also gives you a little more defensibility. Like the more formal the action is, the more defensible it is. And so if ever people were to challenge, why did you fund, say, a project that benefits one sector over another, or one area of the county, of the basin over another, you'd have that protection of, okay, well, our standing committee did this work. The downside, though, of a standing committee is it's Brown Act compliant. So you've got to notice and agendize its meetings and meet regularly. And I know we're somewhat allergic to additional levels of bureaucracy, right? When we're just trying to get something done. So just a pro and con for the board's consideration there if you want to do ad hoc versus standing committee.
You bring up a good point, because we recently moved from having a drought ad hoc for Mendocino County to having a standing committee that already existed, which was a public health and safety standing committee. And in fact, on September 21st, we're going to meet to talk about all of our water issues. So for those of you who have your calendar handy, mark the afternoon of the 21st of September. It'll be noticed probably next week. But everything Holly says is absolutely true, is if we go to standing committees, there's another layer of bureaucracy that goes with them, because they do have to be publicly noticed and Brown Act compliant, whereas ad hocs don't. And I'm thinking for something like this is sort of a one-time special event, which is, developing a grant application, maybe an ad hoc's appropriate. Your thoughts?
Are you asking me or the board? Yeah, for one time for one grant, sure, ad hoc works. If you generally want to be going after money on a consistent way and having people on point for it, so they develop some expertise and kind of know who's on first. If it's ongoing, then a standing committee might make some more sense.
Okay.
If it's one time for one thing, yeah, why make it more bureaucratic than it needs to be?
Okay. Al?
Yeah, my concern on the standing committee is because it is another level, it has another expense, and we're already wanting to manage what we have, which isn't much. And we don't know, since we're so unclear on what the data will ultimately show, since that's what we lack, we may be in a position to have to be searching for grants continuously, or we may be just writing up a little, hey folks, everything's pretty cool. We just got these few things that we have to do, whatever. I don't know. So until we have a little more clarity on that, I think the ad hoc is the way to go.
So if I may make a suggestion, Chairman Gordy, you can modify the recommended action to read as it stands, but then also add the board's consideration for appointing an ad hoc if you desire, based on the feedback you received.
Okay. I think that's a good idea, but we need to have someone make a motion and then also modify it for us.
So moved.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, Eric, you want to read back the motion for the group to vote on?
Yes, the board direct GSA staff to prepare a letter proposal for West Yost in cooperation with LWA to prepare and submit a GSA application for the DWR implementation grant, and for the board chair to appoint an ad hoc to guide the proposal and application process.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's have a roll call vote.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
Chair McGorty,
Yes.
and the motion carries with 4 ayes.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the next item. Sorry, I'm getting a little lost here. So this would be the rate and fee study. Eric?
Beth, really quick.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Beth.
did you appoint members to the ad hoc? Did I miss that?
I have not. So
Okay.
it's something that we'll probably need to do in consultation. I'm thinking of you on it, Beth, since you're head of the TAC. Certainly, I'd want to see you on the ad hoc since you are.
That'll teach me to speak up.
And probably 2 other interested persons. So, you know, we don't have to do that today, but sometime in the next week or so, maybe in consultation with Eric and I will approach 2 others, unless there's someone who really would like to do it.
I thought it had to be done at the meeting, so thank you for the correction.
Yeah, I'm correct on that, Holly, that ad hocs can be appointed outside of a meeting.
Yeah, it's more normal to do it in the meeting because we just try to take care of business in the meeting, but there's no rule.
Well,
You can't do it.
That being the case, is anybody else care to be on an ad hoc to deal with to help in the grant development? Beth?
Rather than me, I know I am the chair of the TAC, but I'm thinking there are other TAC members that are actually more experienced with grant funding. You mentioned Sean White earlier has a fantastic track record, and Deborah Edelman from the RCD is a TAC member, and she also has a lot of experience. So that's just a suggestion.
Sean and Deborah, would you consider it? Sean first.
Struggling to expand here. Hang on. Yeah, I'd be fine with it.
Okay. Deborah?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I could participate in that.
Great. So we have 2 ad hoc members and Doug?
Question.
Sure.
Since members of the ad hoc do not vote, they don't count against being part of a quorum. So there would be the ability to have up to 2 members of the body as well.
That is correct.
Yeah, good point. So I certainly would participate in that since I'm kind of on a higher level looking at this from water policy for Mendocino County. So is there any other board member that would like to join this enterprise? Doug would. Okay, so we have an ad hoc. Thank you, Holly, for pushing us to get stuff done. So we have an ad hoc appointed for the grant development consisting of Sean White, Deborah Edelman, Doug Crane, and myself. Okay, thank you. Eric, next item.
The next item is to discuss the rate and fee study. So I will give a brief overview of what we discussed at the TAC level, and then discuss a couple of paths forward that we've identified. And this should be fairly straightforward since we voted on one of those, and that is now part of that path. So there's 2 scenarios we can run with the rate and fee study. If the GSA would like to pursue the rate and fee study, there's 2 possible paths. One is that the GSA pursues the rate and fee study as soon as possible, meaning that we release an RFP as soon as we can, preferably in the next 30 to 60 days. And we move quickly to have an interview and selection and whatnot, and have it be have a rate and fee study consultant selected and approved at the next board meeting in December. And then the GSA starts moving forward on that in January of 2023. But the risk of that is that if the GSA would like the grant to fund that, and we want to start spending money before we know we have the grant, that's consideration. The pro of that is that we get it moving faster. But the con of that is if we don't get the grant, then we will be spending money from out of our pocket before we know we have a grant. And then if we don't get a grant, then that's coming out of our pocket at the end. The second path is a little bit more conservative path, which is that we pursue the rate and fee study as part of the grant effort. And so there's an alternative to that, which I'll discuss after I discuss the first one, which is we release RFP in March and we have a final selection and adoption by the board in June 2023. And then if the grant funds are awarded, we then start moving towards having the rate and fee study consultant work and starts billing to the grant versus billing to the GSA. But an alternative to that, after discussions with Holly at our standing meeting a couple days ago, she suggested that it might be beneficial that we release the RFP in January and we give ourselves a nice 6-month window to gather proposals from numerous highly qualified rate and fee study consultants. And we do a careful selection process, interview process, and we then get them on board in March of 2023. And then we don't actually start the work until we know if we can bill to the grant or not, depending on how that outcome is. So the alternative for path 2 is a more intermediate approach between the conservative and the more aggressive one. And the alternative path is probably the one that will get us the best qualified consultants to respond and giving them enough time to be aware of our desire to conduct a rate and fee study, as well as allowing us to carefully select the appropriate one that we think will be the best value for what we would like to do. So that is the rate and fee study agenda item and the possible paths. And I'll send it back to you now, Chair McGordon.
Oh, we have a comment by Laura.
Yeah, just one quick thing. I really like your 2 options, Eric, but what might be important to remember is that this grant is retroactive. So if you start working, if you decide that in March you get the approval and your grant is funded, you can even, it's true, it's a risk for the consultant, but you can start working and you can charge all those hours, even if they will be paid in July or in October, or most likely the following January, whatever. But it's retroactive actually to December 2021. So not that you need that, but just to keep it in mind. So all the costs that you are incurring right now in terms of fee study can be included in the grant, so they can be paid by the grant.
And I have a question too, as it goes to doing an effective study. If we don't have a complete inventory of wells, then how can we sort of assign costs? I mean, that's something that concerns me. So I'm wondering how quickly we can start on this, or if those 2 studies should be done together.
You know, we may not necessarily need the inventory of wells. All the previous discussions and the previous ad hoc on this was leaning much more towards either a parcel or an acreage type assessment instead of trying to track down each and every well in Mendocino County for the purposes of taxing those wells.
Okay, all right.
Director Crane had his hand up a moment ago.
Director Crane?
Regarding the funding, which may exceed the income if grants not accepted, going back to the funding members that have been floating this boat from the front end, from the beginning, going back to them and getting their buy-in on providing funds in the event there is a failure. So instead of being blindsided if that were to occur, they've bought in, or at least declared they don't want to buy in, which would be important for us to know.
That's an excellent point. And one thing that I believe I neglected to mention is that in that fiscal management model that I shared a glimpse of, I do project and assume that we would consider exactly what you just said, Director Crane, and potentially going to the member agencies and asking them, can you please front load 10% more in fiscal year 23-24 and fiscal year 24-25. And then that way that gets us through that initial spending phase. And then in fiscal year 25-26, we then would reduce it down 20%. So then that way at the end of it all, the member agencies are paying the exact same amount. They're just giving it a little bit early, and then they trail it off towards the end. So that will be considered based on further discussions that we identify as being important to manage our cash flow. But excellent point. Thank you for that.
Director Crane?
Part of that point was if there's a risk of not having fund recovery, that may well represent an increased cost. That component seems to be missing from what you suggested. So I think that both of those things need to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look into both, and we will consider both in the future.
Director White?
Yeah, maybe I didn't understand it completely, but I thought when I was looking at the spreadsheets that you produced, the one without any grants still had the fee study funded within the budget that we had, because we have to do that. I mean, that was never an optional thing. That's a definite. So it seems that what I'm hearing now is that the implications of that was that we would need to maybe accelerate the contributions of member agencies a little bit to stay solvent through that period.
Yes, and in that same sheet, in the scenario where there was no grant funds, I assumed that we would get 10% more in fiscal year 23-24 and fiscal year 24-25, and then we would drop down 20% in the last year of that. But that is not a for sure thing yet. That would be discussed in the future, and we would ascertain what that situation may be and what we need to plan for in further detail at future meetings, based on what we get back from the rate and fee study consultant on what their costs will be and who we finally select. We can then fine tune that model to actually determine how much and if any we need to front load to stay solvent through that period. And also whether options there might be for us to have flexibility.
Okay. Director Robinson.
So if I understand correctly, we're going to do a rate study either way. And it turns out the timing of that rate study may not be terribly sensitive because the grant will help us out retroactively if we're so fortunate to get a grant.
Yes.
Personally, I don't see any reason to wait too long. Let's give it the proper time so that we make a good choice.
Yeah.
In other words, no rush, but let's get started.
I think there are some political advantages too, since they're within the Board of Supervisors, for instance. I think that there's some concern about the county spending money specifically on one area, which I don't agree with, but I'm just looking at the political realities of how we have to do business. And I think that if we can show that we're making progress to self-fund, that's a positive thing. So, so there is a motion associated with this is basically that we recommend the board to direct GSA staff to prepare an RFP to conduct a rate and fee study to be ready for release once grant funds are obtained.
So moved.
If I may, really quickly, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to interrupt since there was a motion. If you wanted to modify the recommended action to be, instead of being released once grant funds are obtained, you could also modify it to release once the grant has been applied for and a proper date has been agreed upon to pursue the rate and fee study and release the RFP in anticipation of grant funds, which would be the alternative path language.
Okay, so would the maker of the motion go along with the modification?
Yes. The point that Director Robinson made was that this has to be done anyway. So we do need to, and we have in the budget to make the request, but we don't have assurance that we will have grant to backfill.
Yes.
So I have more comfort with this, yes. If part of this is that we go to, at some point in the fairly near term, we go to the supporting bodies and say, this is the path we're on. Is everybody on board, or are we going to have a problem if the grant doesn't come through and we wind up creating enough dissatisfaction in one or more of the funders to take this thing apart?
Okay, so is there a second to the amended motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's have a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry, before we do that, is there any public comment? Yes, Devin.
Chair McGordy, to your point, I mean, one thing I would suggest, if this looks for some reason to be contentious at the Board of Supervisors level, perhaps you can keep an eye on that process, and we could, some of us could assist in that conversation if necessary.
Okay, will do. All right, we're ready for a roll call vote.
Director White,
Aye.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
Chair McGordy,
Aye.
and the motion carries with 4 ayes.
And just one final comment. Again, this is a mandate from the state. So Mendocino County is obliged to deal with it. And that's part of the reason why we're a member agency in this JPA. So that will be my story to the board, and probably some members won't like it, but that's the reality. So thank you. Next agenda item, which is amendment to West Yost Associates Administrative Services Contract. Eric.
Thank you, Glenn. And I will make this fairly brief and to the point in the context of time here, which I know is valuable for everyone. So I'm going to share my screen really quick, and I'm going to point out 2 details that are important to explain the contract amendment. So over the past 6 months, there have been several things that have come up that has been voiced either by the board or has been voiced through other conversations that we may need to modify our contract to provide additional services to meet some of the current new items that have come our way that was not expected in the original contract, but also to provide additional funds towards certain items that we are planning to pursue based on conversations we've had in the past, but also what we voted on today. And I would also like to point out that all the items except for task item 9 here was approved in the fiscal year 21-22 or 22-23 budget. So there should be no surprises in terms of the budget going forward into this year. And also that the fiscal management model that we showed you earlier, that accounts for all these things also being represented in addition to legal counsel. So there is financial basis to be comfortable with what we're proposing this amendment. The current contract calls for $200,000 over a 3-year period. And this amendment is asking for an additional $150,000 over that same period. So then that would update the contract from $200,000 to $150,000. When it comes to the additional services that would be coming in with extra cost, the first is management of the GSA compliance with the executive order. So then that would fall under the existing task number 3 for GSP implementation. And then there would also be additional stakeholder communication outreach, which is to manage the DWR FSS staff and the outreach to tribes, which is based on the communication engagement plan update and the feedback that came from there. And also we'll be talking about the additional services, which will be no cost to the GSA that the FSS is planning to provide in the rest of this fiscal year. The Task 7, grant writing and management, that has always been a part of our contract, but there was no funding associated with it. And so this is funding the $50,000, which was already approved for this budget for this fiscal year. And this is actually just putting money to that budget itself. That's to this task item that exists. The 2 new task items that are new and they were not a part of the existing contract are Task 8 and Task 9. Task 8, those costs were presented at the June board meeting in our rate and fee study discussion. And so this is providing additional services for administrating and management of the rate and fee study consultant and the legal counsel services, but also for us to do additional stakeholder engagement and outreach related specifically to the rate and fee study through meetings and through workshops. So that is what this task item would create, but also the budget associated with that. And then there's also been numerous comments about the GSA website and moving it over to our contracts. Then we can create a new website and have an email address associated with that website that we can be tied into and can manage directly. And so that what this task item is, and that's the cost associated with that. And then just to show you the fiscal year 2022-2023 budget, the 133 for the end account balance and the expenses, this is very close, if not nearly identical to what was approved at the June board meeting. So with that, I will pause and happy to take any questions before we move on.
Sure. So just a couple of questions in terms of engaging consultants for some of the grant writing and the rate and fee study. How does that work? So are these expenses in addition to whatever our contracts are for the people to do the rate fee study and our grant proposals?
Let me just make sure I understand your question correctly. So your question is this contract amendment adding additional scope and fee in order to do grant writing and management and also to support the rate and fee study? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes. So the answer to both of those questions is yes. Additional funds would be provided for us in conjunction with LWA to pursue the grants and to submit a grant application. And then also if we pursue the rate and fee study and determining how we actually define the scope of that rate and fee study, that'll give us a better understanding of exactly what type of workshops and meetings we would need to make sure we do stakeholder engagement and outreach regarding to that. But that also includes scope and fee for us to support in that capacity. The thing to keep in mind is that we may not spend the entire amount that has been budgeted for either one of those items. It all depends on the final scope of both those items once they are completed and once we have a further understanding of that.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it wouldn't be necessary then for the person who is doing the studies to have the public outreach meetings that would be handled internally by our staff. Is that correct?
That is correct. It would be us supporting that, and then the rate and fee study consultant would be conducting the rate and fee study itself and the analysis. Yeah.
Other questions from board members? Director White.
Does the FSS handle that outreach thing or not?
When it comes to the rate and fee study, that is a gray area from my understanding. And I think the state is a little uncomfortable with supporting that for reasons around the political sensitivities. But I did pitch that, and I don't believe I got any clear confirmation on if they can do that. If there's an option for us to have FSS support in that way, we will certainly explore that. But from my understanding is that DWR would not be able to provide the funds through FSS to support that type of stakeholder engagement and outreach.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members? Okay, barring none, any questions, comments from the general public? All right, well, that being the case, I would entertain a motion for the recommended action, which the board approved the proposed contract amendment to West Yost Associates GSA Administration Services contract.
Move to approve.
Okay, is there a second?
Zach, I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded for the recommended action. Any further comment? All right, then I'll call for the vote.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Aye.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
Chair McGorty,
Yes.
and the motion carries with 4 ayes.
Very good. Okay. All right, next on the agenda. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble jumping back and forth here. Compliance process with Executive Order N722. Eric.
Thank you so much. So today we have 2 guests that will help us with our conversation today on the compliance process with Executive Order N722. We have a representative from the County Environmental Health Services, Marilena, is that correct in pronouncing it? She is present with us to answer any questions that may come up from the county's perspective of where they're currently at in their process in conjunction with our own. And then also have Holly, our legal counsel, present, who I've been working closely with to iron out our process and our compliance form. And we are nearly there, and we potentially could, based on our discussion and board's approval today, finalize that process and move forward with actually reviewing permits and moving forward on actually complying with the executive order. So to get started, I am going to just give us a quick recap on the process that we're currently at. So for the GSA's perspective, we're only focusing on 9A of the executive order, whereas the county, they're focusing on 9B of the executive order. And at the end of the day, the county is the permitting agency for wells that they get. So ultimately, they're the permitting authority. We are just providing our written verification related to 9A. And so the process that we proposed was that based on a permit that the county receives, and if it's within our basin, within our jurisdiction for us to provide a written verification, the county would then forward those permits along to us. And then we would then review them on a quarterly basis to take whatever permits we receive, being the GSA staff and also our technical consultants being LWA. We will review the well permit in relation to the GSP and what's being called for in 9A, provide our analysis, and then provide a draft of the written verification compliance form that was signed by the permittee and others, and then send that to a well permit ad hoc review committee, and or we can make that a standing committee, as this may be a long-term thing. It may be worth making a standing committee. And then there's 2 possible ways we can go about it. depending on the board's comfort level. The first is, and Holly looked into this, is if the board is comfortable with having the board chair being the final approval and signature authority for a well verification form to simplify the process, that is allowed, and we can do that with certainty and comfort. But if the board feels that for maybe well permits that aren't necessarily routine and there maybe could potentially be more complex or contentious, then we could also take those and have those actually go to the board for further discussion before they get approved and signed. And then ultimately, whatever verification we provide, being a yes or no, we would then send it back to the county. The county would then have our verification, and then ultimately they make the decision on what happens with the well after that. So with that, that is the process. We also have one revision to our form. Thank you to Holly and her team. And it has been advised by our legal counsel that we include a hold harmless and release agreement to mitigate the legal risk that potentially could come through certain scenarios that our legal counsel has reviewed. And that has been the major change since last time we reviewed this form. And essentially our form is asking the well permittee to give us information, also give their acknowledgements, a signature to us on certain things. We would then give them our determination. And if we ultimately say that the well permit does not fall within our parameters for 9A, we would then provide them an explanation and also give them possibility to comment. But ultimately this hold harmless and release agreement is what's going to be the major protecting factor for the GSA moving forward with a written verification form. So with that, I'm going to pause and pass it back to Chair McGordy.
Are there any questions or comments on this proposed procedure?
Question and comment.
Yes.
I think that time is of the essence. I think this winds up essentially being a duplicative effort. We in the past supported the idea of it going to the chair. As a modification to that, I would quickly support the idea of it goes to the chair. If the chair is comfortable with it, the chair approves it. If the chair has any concern, he calls a special meeting so that we get this turned around for whoever it is, because time is of the essence.
Mm-hmm. I tend to agree with that, because when people drill wells, they're normally in some kind of a crisis. If it's particularly if they're in an area that where their well is failing for whatever reason, so we don't want to be holding them up for months. The part I'm curious about is that is there the possibility of protests, being heard from neighbors. So is that in this process?
Well, as I understand it, the county is already going to have passed on it in terms of technicalities. This is one of those things that Sacramento, in its great wisdom, just dumped on us as a duplicative effort.
Okay, so we have Marlena wanting to comment. Go ahead, Marlena.
Well, I had a couple questions, pretty small ones, about the form and the anticipated process. And I appreciate Eric sending this to us and for Devin making sure we connected on this meeting. When I look at the form, the very top, that ordinance placeholder, I'm curious about that expectation. And I'm wondering if simply stating that the executive order created this requirement is enough, because I do not know when the board is going to pass or amend existing ordinances that would speak to this in general. So that's one thought. And the other is that time is the main thing that stands out to me in this. It said in the notes that it's anticipated to take about 4 months. So the county would be willing to inform applicants of that. That's a long time when waiting for a well application. And there was something else. I was wondering, when there could be an application that is referred from EH to the GSA because it does not automatically appear to qualify for the waivers. What scenario is the GSA anticipating being able to say that it turns out this well doesn't require our comment?
Excellent questions. The first one, I'm going to refer you back to our legal counsel, Holly, to answer that one first, and then I can tackle the last two.
Hi, Marlena. It's good to meet you. Thanks for being here. So the questions I heard you ask were, one, sort of a question in the form of a statement that you're not quite sure if or when the county will be adopting an ordinance. And so your question is, could we revise the form? I mean, yes, our form should match reality. So if we don't have an ordinance to reference to, yeah, we could revise that to refer, pursuant to the executive order, blah, blah, blah. It would certainly be probably cleaner and more consistent and defensible if the county adopted an ordinance. Do you know if the county intends to do that at some point, but just isn't sure at this point what's going on?
Well, we do have an ordinance, but it does not speak to the executive order. It's been in place for decades for our well permitting. We certainly will probably need to amend it if things like Assembly Bill 2201 moves forward. It will require updates, but that's far in the future. I also know that the board has directed County Council to review an ordinance that speaks to water extraction, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the executive order. So I'm not really seeing a concrete project that would be an ordinance coming anytime in the next year. Please correct me if I'm wrong, supervisors.
So good news for you on that part. This just happened, a few very, very recently, but AB 2201 died like basically in the last hour of the legislature.
Tuesday, right?
So, yeah. Yay. So we don't have to deal with that right now, but it's probably not dead, just resting, right? So it might be coming back later as the drought. God willing and the creek don't rise, it'll stay dead because the drought ends. But given the way we're going at the moment, they might take another run at it. So yeah, so we'll just, maybe you and I could follow up separately and work on the language. Yeah, I want to make sure whatever I give the board matches the county's reality.
Certainly.
Great, thank you.
And then to your two other questions, I don't remember both off the top of my head right now, but I think one of them was, how are we going to make a determination based on whether or not it's really within our purview or not? Really, from what my understanding is that it's within the basin and it meets those requirements for being pumping greater than 2 acre-feet a year, and it's not one of those special case wells types, then it is within our purview to review. Otherwise, it's not. And if we look at it and we further figure out from the information we gather that it's actually not a part of our jurisdiction, then we will simply pass it back to you and let you know that we don't believe it is, and this is why. So we would give you a clear understanding of that. And then I believe your second question was our review process being 4 months long. So because we're comfortable with having the board chair be the determining person to say, yes, this looks good after the GM and our ad hoc and others put together the draft of it and present it to the chair. If Chair McGordy is comfortable with signing off on it, then that'll be quicker than 4 months. That'll be as soon as we get that done on our end, and then it gets to him, and then he can then sign. However, if he is uncomfortable, based on what Director Crane suggested, if he's uncomfortable and he would like it to be talked about at a special meeting, we will hold a special meeting as soon as we can to discuss it, move and make a determination and then move on and then send it back to you. So 4 months is a worst case, longest review time. In reality, it will probably be within 60 days or less if we go and we have no special meeting that we need to call or have a board meeting specifically to talk about it.
Could you say that again? In reality, you think it's going to be what?
60 days or less would probably be the more or less what the turnaround time would be, assuming there is no special meeting that needs to be had.
Okay. I wonder how you're anticipating communicating with the applicants, because we field phone calls every day, and it is something I'd like to get ahead of. Are you going to be speaking directly with well drillers? I know they've contacted you guys in the past. What are you anticipating?
So in terms of how we view this process, all the information that we would be getting for our form, I pulled this based on the information that we would be getting from the permit itself. If there's anything that's missing in the permit that we need for our form, we would then contact them directly and let them know this is the information we're seeking. And then we would also let them know this is the form and this is our determination, and we need you to sign this form for us to make our final verification and then to get it signed and move it forward. So we would then be communicating with them directly to get this form signed, but then also get information we need that's missing. But I'm assuming that you would like to maybe be included in the chain of that communication just to make sure that you're abreast as to what's happening, or how are you envisioning that?
Well, I don't anticipate that many of these, so I would like to say yes, please do. I am anticipating including your paperwork in our applications and making sure that all of our applicants have them in their hands. And just for clarity for everyone else, all applications have to be submitted by the licensed well driller. So we're talking about working with about 15 companies currently, making sure they have all the paperwork they need to get their applications processed.
Okay, so Holly, you have a comment?
Oh, I believe Ms. Bohr had her hand up first.
Okay. Devin?
Well, Holly, if it's relevant to the previous conversations, I can defer to you if you want to do
It
that.
is.
Okay.
Thank you. It's just in the interest of getting things done in real time. Marlena, how about this language? In compliance with the EO N722, the following must be completed, and then we'll add a new sentence. The County of Mendocino Department of Environmental Health is responsible for review and permitting of new groundwater wells. So that I just want us to be clear what our lane is and that we're staying in our lane. And that incorporates, I believe, your suggestion as well.
I think that sounds great.
Okay. So Eric, if you didn't capture that, I can email it to you to revise and redistribute.
Yeah, please do.
And then with regard to communications, one suggestion would just be a good old fashioned FAQ. We could post it on our website. You could post it on yours. If we develop it collaboratively, they should match. And then everybody's getting the same information. And we just put down your name, right, for any questions. Just send them to you.
Or another one of your staff.
Yeah. Do you have staff? Yeah. You're the team.
Not in Ukiah. There are 2 staff in Fort Bragg.
Right. So then we'll just be real clear that, for questions, here's what the county does, here's what the GSA does. For questions about the GSA, call Eric, and questions about county, call you.
Okay, Devin, anything further before we move on to Director Robinson?
Well, I can defer, like I said, to Director Robinson. That's fine. You have an open public comment, yeah.
Okay. Director Robinson.
Everyone's deferring. The flow chart suggests that the permittee have direct contact with the county, and there's no indication that they would communicate with this group, and I see that as preferable.
Okay, finally, Devin.
Okay, couple questions here, and thank you, Marlena, for being here today. I've been sort of fielding questions on both sides, and honestly, it's been mostly from outside of the GSA that I've been getting some pretty oddball questions on this process. So in terms of FAQ, I think that would be appreciated, and this might fit there, but on our application, Eric, I think I've mentioned this in the past, I'm pretty sure most of our well drillers have no idea what our GSP says, right? So there's that section in there that says, are you compliant or, full, da, 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 da. So there should be some reference link or something there that people can at least read and acknowledge to understand what that looks like. And again, not to make this very, elementary, but I think a map of the basin would also be helpful, for either Marlena to include or, hey, if you're in this map, this is the GSA area, right? So I think that would be appreciated. The other thing I brought up in the past, and Marlena, maybe you've already dealt with this, so feel free to jump in here. I mean, this applies not just to new wells, but to, any sort of, repair work, modifications to existing wells. And I've expressed this in the past. There's a difference in need and priority for having to mitigate a repair on an existing well, if that's your only water source, whether that's agricultural or municipal or what may be it, versus the installation of a new well. So I don't know if there's a process in place, within our sort of flow chart there that would prioritize, any of those permits that came in, potentially for review as necessary. And I think Supervisor McGordy asked about a protest process for adjoining property owners, but Marlena, I'm not clear if there's, if there is a denial process under this, either through the county or through the GSA. What is the applicant's protest process?
I'm sure I didn't keep track of all of them, but for the applicants, we have provided them with a list and a map. It would be great to have a 1 to 2 page short version. I've only had one of the drillers look at the 300 and something page document with attention and interest, but we did make it available to them and make sure that they do have the maps and a list so that they know whether or not their lines are in or out to begin with. But it would be great to have that easily available. I'm working with what I would say on the repair permits. It's a great question. I don't have a full answer. We haven't had any repair permit applicants yet. We've had, I think, 100 applications since the executive order, and none of them have been repairs for non-domestic use. So it hadn't come up, but I think that's a great point that I should think more about. And the appeal, it's a great question. We at the county are making sure that our review of these applications is very ministerial and clear. And we have received one complaint so far that County Council has reviewed. And currently, there has been no evidence of violation because we fall into an area where a neighbor is going to allege that one neighbor is going to use the water or has been seen using the water in a way that they had previously agreed not to use it. And County Council is working on a framework for following up with code enforcement. We're not entirely sure how that would go. We have not found any bad operators yet, but we're in conversation about what that looks like. Currently, there's not a formal appeal to a well permit. Either they meet the criteria and they get it, or they don't meet the criteria and they don't. And we'd like it to stay that way.
Quick follow-up though, I think, and I totally understand that. I know this is sort of new territory, but one of the things that you and I had talked about a little bit was like, what's the definition of like close proximity, right? And that's sort of, there's some new definitions that came with this order that weren't defined. And as far as I know, DWR and their clarification hasn't defined those as well. The legislation had some oddball attempts at putting some clarification in there, but those are the kind of things where I think it might open up for, especially with this sort of differentiation of review levels, there might be some possible challenges there, but it'd be hard to tell till we see that happen. But we might have to develop a process, I guess is my point.
Yes, and that meeting on the 21st, the public health meeting, I believe a topic like that is going to be brought up because we've already been asked, what is a definition of domestic use? Can it include, does the jurisdiction have the right to change it? DWR says, I think you can to a point. What does that mean? So we are going to investigate that at that meeting because a lot of questions have come up along the lines of what any of these words actually mean in reality.
Holly.
So I know Christian Curtis a little bit. He's super smart, but I also know he's very busy. When you say you're making sure the well permits are ministerial, that makes me think about CEQA, and I would just urge you to make sure that in your process you're paying close attention to the Protecting Our Water and Environmental Resources v. County of Stanislaus case, which is a recent California Supreme Court case on exactly that, right? Good. Excellent.
Okay.
And Chair McGorty, before we do recommended action, I would actually like to revise what's on the agenda or suggest a revision based on our discussion today.
Go ahead.
I would revise recommended action to be that the board direct GSA staff to finalize the compliance process with Executive Order N722 and modify the compliance form and work with County Environmental Health Services to what's the word for it? to post a FAQ and a FAQ, and then as well as the final forms are consistent across both county and the GSA.
Okay.
I'm unclear what the approval process would look like. Did you modify that, Eric, or is it the 3-stage approval process with a consultant, with Glenn, and with?
Oh, Zach, you muted.
Holly, do you want to make a comment?
Only after the director's done. Thank you.
Okay.
Eric, does the 3-stage approval process still stand then in your recommended action? That would be Glenn, that would be an ad hoc, and that would be a consultant?
Yes.
Okay.
One additional step that you might consider taking is to have the GSA via resolution decide that it wants to have the board chair do these approvals, right? So that you have the delegated authority of the GSA chairman. And the handy part about doing it by resolution is you can put in your whereases, like whereas in the interest of time, because this is time sensitive, right? So we're not waiting for a board meeting that way. You have something good in your record. If people say, why weren't these discussed at a board level? You know, it's just protective of you, and the GSA is to explain our reasoning. And if the board wanted to direct us to do that resolution, we could and have it ready. Let's see, that would be for the next board meeting. Are we trying to get this done much sooner than that, right?
I think the preference is to do it as soon as possible.
Okay. Do you have any special meetings planned between now and then where we could throw that on the agenda?
We don't have any special meetings planned, but it's up to the chair to decide if we need to have a special meeting to make sure we can address this as soon as possible.
Okay. So, and you already have this agendized as an action item. You could just have a motion that says that and vote, and then you wouldn't have the benefit of a resolution, but you would at least have the board taking a vote to direct that this is something the chair does now, right? And this conversation is recorded because y'all are super transparent. So we would have that.
Okay, well, can you give us language for a recommended action? Someone?
I can try to summarize that. The recommended action could be to direct GSA staff to complete and finalize the process to comply with the executive order, coordinate with the county to produce a FAQ, and to be clear on our consistency across all of our forms that are being posted publicly, and to have the chair propose a resolution to have the chair be the authority to approve these written verification forms in the interest of time. Is that correct, Holly?
We're just
Or
going to
close.
have a motion.
We'll have
because
a motion.
Resolution would be the written thing. Right.
Have a motion to move on a resolution at a future meeting, right?
No.
No, did I get that wrong? I'm sorry.
We need direction from the board. If you want this done by a resolution, then we'll have to do a special meeting. Alternatively, and I'm just doing this in real time, we could have a motion now that the board votes to have this be something that the director does.
And we could, at the next regular meeting, have the resolution.
Yes, that would work as well and be a little more normal,
I would move
slower.
If it was that, I would move it.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said, Doug. Would you please repeat that?
In the interest of time, we can take a vote that we set this in place. We set it in motion. And we can say that as part of that, at their next meeting, we will bring it as a resolution for the body to approve. So initially we implement it, and then we install the higher level of safety for all concerned with the resolution as soon as we can with a regular meeting. I think that was your point, Holly.
That's a great solution. Thank you.
Well, it's yours.
You improved on it.
That was a motion. I'll second it.
Okay, does everybody understand what we're voting on?
It's a little convoluted, I apologize.
All right, well, if it's clear to everyone, we've had a first and a second on recommended action to basically implement initially what we have in front of us today to amend the application with more information from the county, and finally to have a resolution to give signature authority for the chair to sign off to be brought back at the next meeting, if I understand it correctly. Do I more or less have it right?
But it's not the recommended action anymore. It's a different action.
No, it's a modified recommended action. Okay.
Which we have the authority to do.
I'm sorry?
We have that authority. That's within our purview. We can't change what type of action it is, but we can still take an action.
Okay. All right, is that clear? Or are we ready to vote? All right, then I'll call for the question or for the vote. I'm sorry.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Yes, and amen.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
and Chair McGorty.
Yes, thank you. And thank
Motion
you,
carried.
Marlena, for attending this session. It's real
Thank you very
important to have good communications, and sorry for the confusion this has caused your department, but we're determined to get it resolved and move on.
Yeah, nobody here is to blame. It was a real peach to receive on the 28th, but we'll get it done and have more interesting conversation on the 21st about what definitions could mean for us.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
Okay, nice to meet all of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Whoops, I just hopped to the wrong thing. So I don't have my agenda in front of me. I've lost it. So Eric, can you present the last agenda item?
Yes, and first I'd like to acknowledge that we stayed over our scheduled time, and I would like to thank everyone for sticking with us. This is our last agenda item, and I promise it'll be quick. our agenda item 4F is DWR Facilitation Support Services. And so I'm going to share my screen really quick to give you a quick overview of what we're planning for that. The FSS services contract through Stantec that's paid for by DWR is up for us to renew. And I've been working with FSS closely to identify the level of need we may utilize going forward into this year. And as a reminder, this is no cost, extra cost to the GSA for FSS to provide extra workshops and meetings and a newsletter. This is free to the GSA, pending approval from DWR, but as of right now, that approval is very likely to occur. So what we're proposing is FSS to provide up to 8 workshops and meetings to potentially go over some topics. And one of them was brought up by Devin, which I really appreciate, which was to have a workshop to discuss the GSA's approach to comply with the executive order and how that could impact the basin and the GSP, and also involving maybe the county in that workshop as well. So we can address the agricultural stakeholders directly. Another potential workshop or meeting could be for an annual report to be summarized to the public, so it's digestible and easily understood to our stakeholders, and other topics that might be related to GSP implementation specifically. There also was the newsletter that we would plan to put out quarterly. It would be 2 pages long, and the audience is directed towards beneficial users and uses of the groundwater basin. And the objective is to maintain, expand our region-wide awareness of groundwater conditions and management actions that the GSA is involved in. And then also, FSS would be able to support up to 6 tribal engagement workshops and meetings. And that piece directly came from the feedback we received from the communication and engagement plan. And we are currently in discussions with some members from LL-STEP, which is the Mendocino Lake Sonoma Environmental Program Group, I believe is the proper name for that group. And we would be having meetings in the future with them to hear out each of our tribal representatives within our basin and outside the basin to understand their needs and concerns, and having future meetings to talk about anything else that might be collaboration or beyond that. And so that is what we're proposing for FSS to support us with if we plan to utilize all those or a portion of those. But the recommended action for this is to direct GSA staff to finalize the FSS contract for fiscal year 22-23 and update the rest of the fiscal year GSA TAC board meeting dates and times to reflect any changes that we may want to incorporate on our calendar to put these meetings and workshops on our schedule once they're known, and what workshops and meetings we plan on doing.
Does anyone care to support the recommended action?
I move the recommended action.
I second.
Is there any further discussion from board members? Barring none, is there any further discussion from the general public? I can't see everybody's.
Oh, let me stop sharing, and I don't believe there's any hands up right now.
Okay, barring none, I think we're ready to call for the question.
Director White,
Yes.
Director Robinson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Crane,
Aye.
and Chair McGorty.
Yes.
And the motion carries with 4 ayes.
Okay, well, I think that's it for the meeting. So thank you. We've gone over. I apologize for that, but we also covered some, good stuff, and we're moving right along like we should. So welcome to Holly for participating, and that's much appreciated, as well as everybody else who came today. Thank you.
And our December board meeting will be shorter.
Okay, great. All right, we'll see everyone later.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Recording stopped.